In the previous video, we created a Postgres database and populated it with movies and embeddings describing each of those movies. We also ran SQL requests to use the powers of PG vector to get movie recommendations based on the descriptions that we provided. We did it all with bare Node.js code. And now it is time to add some convenient, even if quite simple, user interface. And we are going to do it with Next.js, a React framework that will help us with the backend API calls and frontend creation. It is based on React.js, and if you are not familiar with either React.js or Next.js, that will be fine. We'll do it step by step together. And to get started, we will just call npx create next application. You can copy it directly from the Next.js website. And here we will need to provide some additional information for Next.js app. First of all, we will need to get the name, and I will call it what to watch. You can select your own name. When it comes to TypeScript, yes, let's agree on that. ESLint, no, we are not going to use it. Tailwind CSS, yes, let's add it as well so that Next.js can add all those dependencies for us and we can be lazy. We will say no to src directory. When it comes to app router, we will select no, even though it is the recommended option. And the reasons for that is that when I experimented with TensorFlow and Next.js, those two, when it comes to new app router, don't really like each other. And those 2 hours I spent debugging, I will never be able to recover. So let's select here no. And let's see, maybe in the future, I will need to update this video because it will be working smoother. But for now, we are going to use the normal older router, which is already included with Next.js, and it's very simple to use. Then we are not going to customize the default alias, and we can see that our project is being created. Now I can open the project in the WebStorm. This is the editor which I am using. You can use whatever editor that you prefer. And let me actually combine it with the terminal because we are going to send some commands to start the server and it will be easier. So let me make sure that I'm in the folder that I need to be. Yes, I am. And to start the server, to start the local host, what we're going to do is to run npm run dev. That will be sufficient to start our server. Now, if you go to the browser and you enter localhost 3000, then you should see your local Next.js project being run, and this is the front-end side. However, we can also check the API route, which is already included as an example. It's called hello. So if we type localhost API hello, then we will see that we get some kind of object being returned, name John Doe. So this is actually an interesting part for us because we are going to use those API routes to create our own requests to the Postgres and to TensorFlow. In the project itself, you can find that hello file in pages API hello TS, and we will be using it in a similar way. But before we start using Postgres and TensorFlow, obviously we need to add those dependencies. So let me expand this terminal window so I have a bit more space. First of all, we need to install TensorFlow libraries. And I'm going to copy those npm install lines. Oh, by the way, I'm using the accompanying material, which you can find in the description box below the link to that, so that you can copy the names of the libraries and avoid those typos which I constantly make. So the first one, we are going to install the universal sentence encoder that we need for TensorFlow. This is the model from TensorFlow that we are using to generate vector embeddings. Next, we are going to install TF.js node, and I would recommend that you install it after Universal Sentence Encoder, then you don't have to deal with conflicting dependencies. If you do have conflicting dependencies, you can run it with force command. So yeah, this will take a bit of time. Again, I mentioned this before, but a TF.js node is amazing because it's actually faster comparing to TF.js, which you can get. So those two are nice in combination. Obviously, we need to install also Postgres library so that we can make requests to Postgres. And because we are going to need credentials from Postgres, we are going to install Dotenv. It will help us to keep all the credentials that we are going to use to connect to Postgres in one single file separately, which will not be committed into the repository. So that's why we use .env. And talking about that, let's copy the properties which we will need, and I will create a .env file, and this looks pretty small for me typing. So let me go into presentation mode so that you can see it a bit better. And now I can open the project files and add a new file that we will need for credentials. I will call it .env. This is how you work with .env library. So here I will pass 4 properties that we need to connect to Postgres. And at the same time, I will add it into gitignore. We will also download here a certificate to connect to Postgres. So let's also add it to the gitignore. And now let's populate those properties that we need to connect to Postgres. For this, go back to the Postgres service, and if you missed the previous videos, we are running Postgres in the cloud. It's totally for free, it's very convenient, it has support for PG vector, so use that. The link for registration and extra credits and all that amazing stuff you can find in the description or in the accompanying article. Once you have your service running, you will have access to all the properties you need to have for connecting to Postgres via Node. So here we will need some properties, for example, host, and we will copy it into the host property. We also need the username of the user which we are going to use, also the password. Remember not sharing password with anyone else. Also copy the port, and this is what we need. Let me just make it a bit more pretty so that we don't have extra spaces there. So this is almost sufficient. We still need to have a certificate which we can download here as well. So this is a certificate to establish a secure connection, and I can copy it into the project. Actually, how about we create a directory called certificates, and we will add that certificate in the directory. And that would mean actually that we need to correct our git ignore file and say that it should ignore anything that is part of certificates folder. And we are done with the basic setup for Postgres and TensorFlow so that we can use it in Next.js project. In the next video, we will add an API route for recommendations and all the necessary functionality to generate vector embeddings for a search request, for a search query. And then we will send that request to Postgres to get the nearest neighbors to that vector embedding with the help of PG vector. I'll see you there.